I'd like to call this meeting of the Lammersville Unified Board of Education to special meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. If everyone would rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Lisa Boulay.
Here.
Colin Clements.
Here.
Anita Daniel.
Here.
Stephanie Olson.
Here.
David Pombo.
Here.
Devika Vitolani.
Absent.
Approval and/or corrections to the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
On a motion by trustee Olson and seconded by trustee Boulay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, information and discussion items. California Voting Rights Act presentation and public hearing. Staff report?
Yes, I'd like to introduce again Ryan Tung, who is our attorney supporting us in this endeavor from Lozano Smith. And presenting tonight will be David Lopez from Cooperative Strategies. So I'll turn this over to David.
Yes, thank you. I'm ready to share the screen here if you're okay with that. Okay, I put on a larger screen, so hopefully you can see the larger image here. Can you see it? Okay, great. Well, good evening, is President Pombo, members of the board, Dr. Nicholas, and staff, and members of the audience. Wanted to cover with you what is called the first of the map scenario meetings. We call it in our vernacular post-map 1. There's a couple more of these to happen before the board has to choose a map for their district that defines their new trustee areas. So this meeting, we're going to present some maps. I'm going to go over the basics again so that there's no confusion. And there's time for feedback from the board or your community to say, well, how about we like this map, but how about a small tweak, or how about a modification, or go back to the drawing board. So we have what we believe are two very good maps. It just depends on what your feedback is. And so I want to start first with the timeline here to let you know what's next and where we're going. We're here today, the 16th. There's another meeting, which we'll call Postmap 2. And then there'll be a final one, which is Postmap 3 in December, where you adopt one of the voting area maps that you feel best represents your district with all the criteria we have to meet. And then on December 13th, the county committee hears us, your council and myself and some staff of the district, and they can ask questions, they can provide feedback, and they hopefully will adopt the map you select at that time. And then we spend the rest of the month and we get everything to the registrar of voters for your county. And then the idea is that in November 2024, you hold elections utilizing these areas. So that's kind of where we are right now. As I said, there's ample opportunity to provide feedback if you don't like these maps, or if you like them, but there's some component you would like modified. And so that said, I want to cover again the considerations that go in the trustee areas. These first two are musts. And the first one is population. They must be balanced by population. There can't be a deviation of 10% or more in the overall population. So that's a must. The second one is it must be drawn to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And that's where this term CVAP comes in. It's Citizen Voting Age Population Estimates that I'll talk about later. But that's to make sure that we're considering that figure and those numbers to ensure we're not diluting any of the so-called protected classes who reside within your district. Now, the rest of these 5 are important, but they're more like mays. So while these are musts, I consider these mays. If we can accommodate them, and we may be able to incorporate them after we consider these two, then that's what we try to do. And this goes into every map that we've drawn for every district, school district across the state over the decade plus we've been doing this. So that said, here's a snapshot of the folks within your community and how they responded to the 2020 census. So although there could be more people in your community, although some of these folks can be naturalized citizens, non-citizens, citizens, whatever, the census allows people to take the census and report. So this population number is the important one here. Of all the people in your county who took 25,869 responded to the census. This column here, who's 18 and over, that's just kind of informative. It doesn't really come into play, but we wanted to put that here just in case, you know, data folks and numbers people like to consume that. But this is the key number here. This is the population. And if there's 5 trustee areas, we need to balance the population by that. So divide that by 5 and you pretty much have 5,174 people or who will comprise each of the trustee areas in a perfect world. You never get them all perfect. Some have more, some have less, but this is the number first and foremost that we work with to balance the population. These other 2 slides discuss what's called citizen voting age population estimates. These are estimates. They're performed by the American Community Survey, which is a division of the US Census. And what they do is they estimate these populations who are citizens and of voting age. It's an ongoing estimate. They do it every year. We use a 5-year rolling average. Right here, it's a 5-year rolling average, which is widely considered to be the most accurate way to estimate who might be of these protected classes and their citizen voting age population. So we look at the highest concentration of protected class within your community, and that is Asian. Now, admittedly, you know, we don't control the census or who falls into what category. I've heard over time that, you know, this particular category includes everybody from the Indian subcontinent to other parts of Asia. And, you know, why is it that way? I've had people in Southern California who are Persian say, I don't have a category. I have to pick white. I've had people of mixed races say, where do I fit? Again, that's not something that we can control. We just look at these categories that the census provides and how people responded. And the same thing that the American Community Survey does, they make monthly calls, they reach out to people across the country, and what they do is they estimate the citizen voting age for all categories, and then we take those census blocks, which is the smallest piece of census data you can get, the blocks, and here's a picture of them here, these little squares, some are weird shape, some of the undeveloped areas are larger, but these are all census blocks. And within those little blocks is a bunch of data, not only the population of people that took the census, but these are used to estimate by the American Community Survey what people of what group are of citizen voting age population within these. So this particular category is what is used to make sure that there's no disenfranchisement of any protected classes and that we don't crack or pack districts and we don't combine majorities that would have 3 majorities in a trustee area into 1, or we don't, you know, throw them to the wind. So we have to be cautious of that, and we have to be cognizant of it in addition to population to make sure that we're not keeping somebody's voice from being heard as we draw these. The second largest protected class, and there's not as many in this category as Hispanic. And again, this color distribution map shows you where most of them reside, but this is a citizen voting age population estimate. And I'll get more into that as we look at some of the data in the slides. But we put this here because this is the second consideration we talk about where it brings up citizen voting age. And these are the columns in the data tables that are black, and whereas the population ones are just white colored. And so I want to cover that with you next as we look at each scenario. So this is our first draft of a conceptual scenario here of what your areas might look like. Again, these were done with the intent of balancing population. A lot of times people say, well, why don't you make it over here? Well, because we do that and now we're 100% out of compliance because we grabbed too many populations, people in these little census blocks. But we follow some kind of, you know, natural lines if we have them, attendance boundaries, natural breaks, roads, and we listed your school sites here just as an informative piece. But if you look at this particular one, and all the colors will be the same, but they might change numbers. So trust area 1 here, which currently is the incumbent is Pombo, is the southern part of your district pretty much. And we had to go that far to get the population that matches some of these other smaller areas. As you know, it's very dense in here. And so that, there's going to be smaller geographical trustee areas, but they're going to be population-wise pretty similar. Number 2 in this scenario is vacant. There's no incumbent that resides here. Number 3, Trustee Boulay, I hope I didn't butcher that. And that would be this reddish area for Clements. And then in this particular one is Trustee Area 5. It's currently shared by Daniel and Olson. So one of the things that I received feedback from in the prior meetings were, we know there's going to be development up here in the future. How do we account for that? Well, what we did was we made this the least populated area, and that's pretty much the best we can do because we have to work within the population parameters of the here and now. And here's how the demographics of this scenario work out. There's a 9.5% population variance, which is perfectly acceptable. Anything under 10% is acceptable pursuant to the CVRA. And if you have other questions about that, I'm sure council can weigh in. But it doesn't matter whether it's 9.9% or 1%. It's suitable and acceptable by the CVRA standards. It's just some districts like to have smaller variances, or in your case, you wanted some of the areas that might be developing in the near future to be have less population because there's going to be development. And this doesn't happen again until 2030 when the next census is out. So everybody that has this trustee area process created, they'll have to go through a process called redistricting and to make sure that all of these still are compliant and balanced pursuant to the law. And that's why they do it every 10 years. But in this situation, this is compliant. It's 9.5% variance. And the way you get that is you look at these total population columns. And you'll see the variance to the median. So this is the ideal trustee size here. And let's start with this one. This is almost identical to the ideal, and that never really happens. But because of that, it's only a deviation of 0.1% off. Whereas this one here has 5323 folks in it, and it's almost 3% over the ideal size. So when you look at the highest positive and the lowest negative, you get the delta between those, and that winds up being 9.5%. So one of the things you should note is this trustee area 5, which is north of Byron and the area around Kesta and Cuesta Elementary, is deemed to be something where you're going to have population growth in the near future. We just don't know when, or perhaps when. But when we did this, we made this particular area less than the average, and essentially there's 344 people less than this, and yet it's almost out of compliance. It's 6.6%, which means you can only have very little of the positive in any of these other categories, and voila, you're at 9.5%. So that's the kind of dynamics we're working with. I know sometimes people say, why don't you make this 3,500 and make the rest balance? Well, then you'd get this variance here probably over 20, 30, 40%, and it wouldn't be compliant. So hopefully that makes sense on that piece. Now, the citizen voting age population estimate is what I was telling you earlier, is an estimate done by the American Community Survey to look at a 5-year rolling average of what these populations may be who are of citizen voting age. And we break them down by each trustee area and by each category provided by the census. So I wanted to highlight some important facts here. This category Asian is a protected class. And in trustee area 2, there's a 53% CVAP number, which makes it a majority. So a majority being 50% plus 1. This is a majority, considered a majority Asian district by citizen voting age population. So that area, trustee area 2, is the green one that's vacant. And so that's, in our opinion, and again, council can speak up, or it's one of the key components of why we do this. If we can achieve a majority in any district, and we kind of say, listen, this is achieved. Let's not mess with this one unless there's some other underlying factors or dynamics in the district, because this is one of the major tenets of why this is done. The other thing is that in trust area 1, you have the highest percentage of Hispanic Latino at 32.7. That's not a majority, but they're considered a plurality here because they're higher than any of the others. So trust area 1 and trust area 2 in this scenario, which is yellow and green, that's a pretty high number given your district demographics for achieving, respecting the protected classes and not diluting their vote. And again, 9.5% population variance between the lowest populated trustee area and the highest is perfectly acceptable. Now, if we go on to scenario 2, this is a different look. And again, the colors are the same, but where they fall on the map are different. So trust area 1 here pairs trustees Clements and Olson together. And you can see kind of here how these census blocks get kind of wonky. We have to follow census blocks. We don't split them, but sometimes they're not perfectly drawn and they're oblong and they're weird shapes, or they go into other areas. And so that's why it looks kind of like a castle here, and some of these look cut out like this. We just have to follow those lines and keep things compact and contiguous as we're drawing these. So in this area, you have 2 trustees paired together. You have the vacancy here still in trustee area 2, even though it has a little bit different look. You have trustee area 3 here, which is a different extension of where it was in the first one. And you have 4, which is right now the incumbent is Daniel. And you have 5, which is this larger area here, and you can see on the map is trustee Pombo. So this scenario is also compliant population-wise, and it has a lower variance. It has 5.7% variance. And again, how do we get that? We look at how each of these numbers compare to the ideal size. In this particular area, trustee area 2 has 2.6% more than the ideal size, and trustee area 4 has -3%. Trustee area 4 is the area where there was projected to be a lot of growth. So when we drew these up, we tried to accommodate the feedback we received in the prior meetings of leaving this area to the north of Byron the least populated to accommodate future growth. But given the size of your district, it doesn't mean thousands and thousands of numbers. It generally means, a couple hundred here. So that's what we're working with. You take a -3% and a 2.7% here, and you get 5.7% is the population variance. Again, is acceptable as the prior one. Now, in this scenario, in the citizen voting age population estimates, in trustee area 2, the Asian citizen voting age shoots up to 67.4, and your highest Hispanic Latino is 35.3 in trustee area 5. So again, that achieves one of the major pieces of what the CVRA, or our impression of what the CVRA is intending to do by not diluting anyone's voice, any of the protected classes being your historical minority groups. And then just to see this side by side, how they play out, and we populated some variances here. This is a 9.5% variance between the lowest and smallest. This is a 5.7. There's an Asian majority in trustee area 2, and I forgot to mention this is also a plurality for Asians in trustee area 4, and there's a Hispanic Latino plurality. Plurality means they're not 50% plus 1, but they're the highest particular category there. Now this is a less population-wise, and it's a different look, so I'm looking forward to feedback we get tonight. It has less of a population variance. You achieve an Asian majority still in trustee area 2, and you have a Hispanic plurality. So these are both compliant with the CVRA and the process as we understand it. And it's just a question of, does it meet your community's expectations and your your hope for what it looked like, and is there some kind of feedback that you want to add as far as how lines should be drawn, or why can't we do this, or what can we do differently, or we like it, let's go forward with just these. That's what the purpose of this meeting is. And that said, be happy to take any feedback or questions the board has.
Questions or comments by the board?
I do have a question. Can you talk about the attendance boundaries and how it relates to each of the trustee areas? Because
Sure.
I know we talked about it at the last meeting just briefly, and I didn't have a good handle on that.
Sure. So we're still waiting for some final review from staff on, if we have them laid out correctly. But essentially, in the draft that we're just kind of worked with internally, I think, so in these scenarios, you can see what school site falls in each area, right? Some have one, some have two, some have more. But in this process, as you know, you're not gonna wind up being a trustee of just one area and representing one school, and that's it. So a lot of times, if we can get the attendance boundaries, we overlap them and alleviate concerns and say, listen, you might have one school site in your trustee area as it's drawn up, but multiple attendance boundaries cross that. And sometimes that helps the public to understand that, okay, these aren't being drawn up where you're just going to be, squared away in one little area and that's all you represent. No, that just means that's where you're going to have to run for re-election against the people within that area who live within there, if anyone wants to run against you. But the attendance boundaries, we're waiting for confirmation, but I believe in both scenarios, at least 2 attendance boundaries cross each area as we had them drawn up.
So can I paraphrase a little bit just to make sure
Sure.
I'm understanding it? So this is Trustee Boulay. I'm in area 3 on both maps. I believe in at least one of the maps, Wickland Elementary is in my district. However, I also cover part of Bethany, and even though my district doesn't have the school geographically located in it, some of those students in Bethany go to Bethany School. So is that what we mean by the attendance overlap?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's say right here, let's say this is Wickland's boundaries, right? I think Wickland goes up here a little bit. But in that case, you have a school site in your area, but the attendance boundaries overlap into this trustee area and here. And because it's drawn this way, you also, are representing some of the Bethany attendance boundaries too. So that is kind of what we mean, that you might only have one school site in your area, but you have multiple school attendance boundaries overlapping your area as it's drawn up. And sometimes communities like to see how that plays out, or board members like to. So we hope to have that for you and have a more clear confirmation in the future.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. Is yours related to her question or different? Okay, so, yeah, my question was just on the, more of a clarification question also, because the board has mentioned our concern about future population growth, and you explained it really well about the legal requirements of the 10% or less variance. But I just wanted to make sure it was clear that trustee area 4 on the second map, and I think it's called trustee area 5 on the first map, that's the area where it will absorb the population growth. And so between now and 2030, people that move in and buy homes in that area, they'll still get to vote. They'll vote in that trustee area. But, so that trustee area might just get really large until 2030.
Correct.
Okay.
So to give you an example, like I'm just on scenario 2, what I've seen happen in districts, and usually they're larger districts where they have like 3 tracts of homes that haven't built yet, and then a developer goes bonkers and starts building them. When we did the redistricting for a lot of districts that already had established these type of voting areas, let's say as an example your size, sometimes you would see this is about the same and this is about the same, and I'm projecting to 2030, and then you find, oh, this is 10,000, this is 12,000, this is 8,000, and they become like 82% variance. So that's why That's why the law requires districts to redistrict and balance it by population. That could happen in a particular trustee area, or in this case, I think the development slated was this whole area here.
Also,
Um,
4 and 5 are affected.
yeah.
Okay.
And then this, it's more up here. So yeah, we did what we could to try to, I don't know what you want to say, pad it, give it some leeway, thinking people were gonna move in here. But because of the size of your district and the ideal trustee area, we can only do it about 500 people at most, to make that work out and still be under 10%.
And I would like to add too, that even though the area north of Byron Highway isn't yet developed, there's going to be growth when the apartments open up in just a few more months. And the data reflect the census, which was 3 years ago. So there was a lot of growth in College Park, a lot of growth in Cordis, a fair amount of growth in Hanson. So, I mean, our numbers are already old. There's nothing we can do about that. So I think it's going to be very drastically different in 7 more years.
Yeah, you're right. Area 5 is also going to be drastically different. That's true.
Yeah.
And I've also heard in other districts, not probably the situation in yours, other districts have had so many people flee the state that they're like, this is 3 years old now. We don't have that many people living in these areas now. They took off. So it cuts both ways, and I understand what you're trying to do, and hopefully the maps that we drew here as drafts get the conversation going, or they accommodate the district's desire. But I wanted to make sure we're really clear on that so that you can see kind of the limitations we have in trying to prepare that area if that's ultimately what the district decides.
Hi, David. This is Trustee Daniel. I came to this meeting with a question about the growth, because definitely the areas that is assigned to me at both the maps do look like they're going to grow in future. And your calculations and your explanation did help, and also the follow-up question by Trustee Olson did help. But I think I'm going to take some time to observe it. I do have a question, though. Can you please explain what plurality means?
Yeah, so here's an example. So you look at only citizen voting age to determine a majority or a plurality. In trustee area 2, you have more than 50% plus 1. You have 53, so that becomes a majority for Asians. If you have not any categories that have 50%, okay, so this one doesn't have any majority, but it has one group that has the most over these other groups. That becomes a plurality, which isn't 50%, but it's the highest of all the others. Same as over here. In this category, this demographic has the plurality. So that's what it means. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep. Okay, thank you.
This is David Pombo. I have a concern that I brought up in the past, and I have yet to get an answer to it. There are, as I've pointed out in the past, there are voters in Alameda County that can vote for our board, and I believe those voters probably have to be accounted for in the mapping, but I'm not certain. I'm not a demographer or a lawyer, just curious.
So when we do these, and that's maybe council can weigh in, but when we draft these, we have to follow the boundaries of the school district. It sounds like your district has a unique relationship with the prior district or folks that I think reside about over here. Is that correct? In Alameda County? And I'm not sure what they can do or not do as it comes to elections, but they're not residents within the boundaries. So I would need council to weigh in. I haven't had that situation happen before. And if there is some kind of unspoken rule that, hey, this is in our district, it slops over to this county, but I've had districts bring that up before, and if it is in a different county, like, or maybe the county lines here, I don't know. But if that does happen, then when you go to county committee, it's generally the largest portion of your district that's in that county is the one that does the county committee. I just don't know enough about, these
Well,
folks out here, and they probably have to vote for somebody. I mean, they're considered in this district over here. Not sure which one that'll be, but that's a question I think maybe Ryan can weigh in on.
I don't know if their numbers have to be considered in the mapping, but they at least have to be attached to one of the areas, I would think, so that people know who they can and can't vote for.
Good evening, board. David, this is Ryan Tung talking. So we have been looking into this particular issue, Trustee Pombo. A couple things that we are looking into. It's going to become a little bit clear for us once we get those attendance boundaries set up, because it's our understanding that these voters, while they're children in elementary school age, will go to Mountain House Elementary. They would be children of the district, so for high school, they would be going to Mountain House High School. So what we're looking into is how those attendance boundaries and how they would impact these potential maps. So we'll have a little bit more information for you on that in a future date. But generally speaking, as Mr. Lopez did say, we usually go to what we call the primary county committee. So in terms of process, we're still going to follow that particular process.
All right. Anyway, I don't believe we're talking about a huge number of voters. I think it's probably less than 200 voters total that are in that school district, the neighboring school district, which just happens to be named Mountain House Elementary School District, but they need to be accounted for somehow.
And when we were looking into that, that was a special arrangement as part of the creation of the school district, 2009, 2008, somewhere around that time. So there is some documentation there that we're able to look to that'll help us inform that particular decision.
All right, thank you. Further questions or comments by the board?
All of my questions have already been asked and answered, at least to the present time. I'm sure that additional questions will come up as the process unfolds.
The board done with questions and comments?
Yes.
At this time, I will open it up to public comment on the hearing.
My name is Arjun Juturu. So thanks for giving this opportunity. I was going through these maps and I did some research on this, and I found that based on Article 21 of California Constitution, you cannot favor or discriminate against an incumbent, political candidate, or political party. So we need to make sure the maps are not favoring any of the incumbents getting into the elections. And one of the graphs I see the percentages, they're putting percentages. See the total population, they're saying 5,200 something, but the percentage, I want to say that if it's say 31%, I want to see what is the population there. In those graphs, they're not showing that. They're simply putting 31%, 51%, 41%, right? If there are 4 people or 5 people and 3 people got voting, that means 60%. So I want to see the number. Like in the beginning, they put 5,200. Out of 5,200, when you say 31%, what is exactly the number of people has based on the CVRP? What is the number, which is not shared here? And one more thing is there is no data shared from where this data came in. There is no reference for this data. It was not shared with public. There should be some data. And I think we need those references, because when we are in a school district, right? When a kid provide some data, we ask them to provide references. Where do you get this data? If you don't provide me the data where you're getting, That data doesn't make any sense to me. I need that where the data you're getting so I can validate your data, right? So that is what I'm missing from this slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Good evening. So first, some questions probably for the demographer, if that could get answered. So if you look at the number of 18 and over individuals, and I'll just use the first row, you've got 2151 for Hispanics that are 18 and over, but yet you have 2,300 that are considered voting age or voting public. So the numbers in the CVAP, I believe in most of the categories of racial demographics, are higher than the number that are 18 or over. So there's a discrepancy. You would think that it'd be the opposite. That you'd have 5,000 people 18 or over, and of those 5,000, 4,000 are citizens and can vote. But this data that's presented is actually the opposite. So that's number one, and it'd be helpful to have an explanation. I do think, it sounds like a lot of input was taken as far as the future development in north of Byron, but I don't think what has been addressed adequately, and Trustee Boulay brought it up, is that there's a significant amount of growth of residents existing today in College Park that isn't being taken accounted for because there's a significant difference between the census numbers of 2020 and who live there today. So you are basically taking, okay, we're going to do a bunch of work for the future, but it doesn't seem like a lot has been taken into account of residents that are here today. So the numbers in the district south of Grant Line in either of the maps would be significantly off if we actually looked at today's numbers. So you are, in essence, diluting that representation because they will have one representation for a larger number of people. And as we all know, that neighborhood tends to be highly Asian. I do think on the information posted online, it would be helpful to have some of the narrative that the demographer explained today written out. So even if they could put a little bit of a brief to say, here's how we did it, here's why it's helpful to have 60% Asian in this trustee area, and there's a plurality of Hispanics over here, that would be helpful so that the public can understand the benefits or the flaws in any of the maps. And then from a process standpoint, I'll make similar comments that I've made before. I think the process has just been a little bit hasty. I think it is helpful to have the demographer still on the phone or on the meeting, this meeting, during public comments, because if this is truly meant to be a public hearing, it is helpful to have the public be able to ask questions of the experts and have some dialogue as opposed to just making a public comment, being told thank you, and then you never hear anything about it. The election code specifically mentions outreach, public outreach. I don't think public outreach has happened. Posting notices that a meeting is happening isn't the same as public outreach. So I think there could have been a much better process followed here. No explanation given for why there was a meeting scheduled on 10/24 for a 6-minute meeting to approve this. You had a meeting 7 days later that could have taken care of it. And while the FAQs say that a lawsuit hasn't been served, the election code specifically says that prior to a lawsuit, you need to submit a certified mail with a written notice. So it'd be helpful to clarify if the district has received by certified mail a written notice to the clerk that a action potentially may be brought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further public comment?
Mr. President, if I may.
Yes.
So I heard some questions. Can we put up the slide showing the population and voting age population for like area 1, the first optional map? Thank you. And if somebody else has a question or comment while I take a look at this, go ahead, because I want to take a look at this for a second. Okay, my next question is for David, the demographer. Did you understand the questions that were raised in public comment?
I understood the second one. I only got bits and pieces of the first one.
So that's what I was afraid of, and I wrote as quickly as I could, but I didn't get them all. Go ahead.
I would encourage the commenters to submit those questions on the district website. There's an email specifically set up for questions or comments about this process, and I would encourage the commenters to pose their questions or comments there, and then district staff and legal and the demographer can see about getting answers in the, either to you directly or in the Q&A on the website.
And if I may clarify, public comment, this is the appropriate vehicle and venue for public comment. However, to get answers, we want to make sure that we truly understand your questions. And I wrote as good as, I was writing questions, but I'm not that fast. My days of debate are long since past. So if you could please help us out by typing your questions, because some of them were good questions, and I'd like to make sure that they get answered, but I failed to get them all. If you could do us that favor, that would.
Trustee Clements will also record. We live stream and record these meetings, so we can go back and watch this and write it down, so we have time to be able to get that information, to get answers from the demographer.
Fair enough. And if it's garbled or something and it can't be understood, then maybe reach out to them for clarification if there was a piece that you couldn't understand. If I may, Mr. President, I would like to speak a little bit to a recurring comment, as it relates to, why so fast and why is this rushed? And I understand how it might seem that way, but from my perspective, this isn't rushed. The district has been working on it. We hired an attorney firm. The attorney recommended a demographer. The demographer took the 2020 census and word and stirred and considered and all of this and did a lot of work. And the district has paid for that work. We have to pay our attorney firm for all of the hours that they spend advising us, and we have to pay the demographer. And there's a significant amount of analysis, and the process was moving towards towards the idea of moving to trustee by area. That I believe it's still true that no school district in the state of California has successfully argued against going to trustee by area in court. So all it would take is a certified letter. And so the district was moving forward, in that vein. What happened, though, was the state has passed a new law that changes the goalposts after the district has gone, I don't know how far, but we've paid for demographers.
A substantial way towards the existing goalposts.
And so we face a choice. We're kind of at a fork in the road at the present time where we can take all of that and start over if we wait until January 1 and use the new goalposts. And that would cost significant money, and that money would come directly from student learning and achievement, because we can only spend every dollar one time. So if we pay our demographers to do the work, which they've done, and then we pay them to do it again, then, we looked at the situation and said, hey, we think it's in the best interest of our students, which is our number one goal here, is to provide educational support for our students, and said, yes, there's time to do it before this new law takes effect, and we would like to. And then the last thing, and it's not like we talked about this, but my personal viewpoint is the existing law, as it exists today, is a known quantity. It's been around for a long time. It's been tested in the courts. It is something that everybody knows and understands. The law as amended or as revised by this new law, essentially our new goalposts, that's new. And the ability to thread that new needle becomes more complex. We might get it wrong. What we're dealing with today is a known quantity. What we're dealing with before, yeah, the law is written, but it hasn't been tested, it hasn't been argued, it's essentially new. So when I look at all of those things, I say, you know what, this isn't really rushed. A matter of fact, a public comment actually voiced the frustration in the second duplicate meeting that we had, saying, this is all the same exact stuff that you said last time. And the whole point of doing 2 of the initial one and 2 of this one is to give the public as much opportunity to hear the exact same thing. You're right. It was exactly the same, maybe not exactly the same words verbatim because it's a human speaking, but the message that they were trying to communicate is exactly the same in both of those and both of these for one reason and one reason only: to give the public as much time as possible and as much exposure as possible. So that's the reason why that's the reason why I was championing doing it the way that we're doing it. Because they're moving the goalposts, the new goalposts, and I have every faith in our attorney and all of that, but the reality is the new goalposts are just that. They're new. The existing ones are well understood, well tested. We're not doing this because, and we said this in the FAQ, we're not doing this because we were sued. We're not doing this because we received a certified letter. We're doing this because we were already moving in that direction. They changed the goalpost. And we decided that it was in the best interest of the district to move forward with the existing goalposts.
And I will just state that it was a concern to the board as well that many of the areas in Mountain House are not adequately represented in the 2020 census. But by law, those, as I understand it, and the demographer or lawyer can step in and correct me if I'm wrong, by law, those are the numbers that we must use in considering the maps. So it doesn't matter if Mountain House doubled since 2020, the population. We have to use the population as represented in the 2020 census, correct? Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Trustee Palma. That's what I wanted to point out is that the way the law's written, that we must comply with it. In my mind, it doesn't make sense either because of how Mountain House is growing, but that's the law. And as Trustee Clements pointed out, no school district has successfully challenged the law and won, or no city for that matter.
I can't speak to cities. I care about the school district.
Well, I like to read court cases, so I read the city of Santa Monica. But anyhow, so I feel the frustration because that the public might be feeling about that because I feel it too, and I don't like it. But the reality is that this is going to take place one way or the other. We were moving towards that, and like Trustee Clements said, it's better to deal with the known and not take more dollars away from our students.
So
I think even if we had waited and done this again in 5 years, yeah, our town would have grown, but we would still have to use the 2020 data.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter. It really wouldn't make a difference unless we waited another 7 years. really 8 years for the 2030 census, and then another year for them to evaluate or to get the numbers out. So, yeah, I agree with the frustration that we have to rely on the 2020 census, which is old information. We're a growing community. We're growing rapidly. There's still a lot of underdevelopment, but our hands are tied in some respects because of the way the law is written.
And also the way things are written, since we know that we can't change the number, who we use, we have to use the 2020 census. There's not a realistic way that I think we would have lasted until 2030 without being dropped with a lawsuit anyhow, which would then have cost us even more money to pay for that lawsuit. So again, thinking of the best interest of the students, we were already moving forward.
So the next drawing is going to be 2030. So we'll have to wait till.
That is correct.
Well, after the 2030 census,
Census
which
is
will be
released.
Yep.
Yeah.
2031
Right.
Yeah.
and beyond,
Yep.
so.
I do have one clarifying question for the attorney, if I may. Even if we knew for a fact that a large number of protected class citizens had moved into a given area to make it a majority, right? Even if we knew that for a fact after the 2020 census, the law, as it is written, would still require us to use the 2020 census.
That's correct. We would have to rely on the 2020 census. The one thing I will say is we're looking at the 2020 census when we talk about total population. So the balancing of the same amount of total people in each trustee area. As Mr. Lopez mentioned, we also do look at that citizens voting age population when we look at the minority populations. And again, it's still not the most up-to-date data, but it is a rolling average of the last 5 years. So it's a little bit more up-to-date when we're looking at those particular figures.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Further questions or comments by the board? I will entertain a motion.
Move to adjourn to closed session.
Second.
On a motion by trustee Boulay and seconded by trustee Olson, all in favor?
Aye.
We are now adjourned. Thank you all for coming this evening. Have a good evening.
Thank you.